The Ghost on the Rooftop, a true horror story. Juan spent his morning fixing a washing machine. From 8 a.m. until nearly noon, he was bent over, tools in hand, struggling with the old appliance. Finally, with a sigh of relief, he managed to get it working and called the customer to arrange delivery. After getting paid, he loaded the machine onto his truck. With the job done, he decided to head to Mrs. Ho's restaurant at the end of the alley for lunch. Her restaurant was always busy, and if he didn't get there quickly, the best dishes might be gone. As he walked into the restaurant, Mrs. Ho smiled and pointed to a dish. "Your favorite, Juan. Shall I get it for you?" she asked. Juan nodded with a grin. "Yes, the usual, please." He looked around and spotted a seat at a table with 3 women. They were silently eating, heads down, without even glancing at him. Juan didn't mind, he was used to this kind of treatment. Most of the people around here only saw him as the guy who fixed washing machines, not worth their time. As he sat and started eating, he overheard one of the women whispering to another about a recent death. "Did you hear about the woman at the corner house? Jumped off the rooftop and died instantly," she said. "Blood everywhere. They say that place is haunted now. Strange noises at night, crying from the upper floors. People are moving out, scared of the ghost." Juan tried to focus on his food, but he couldn't help but listen. The women's conversation was eerie, and their voices were filled with fear. They continued talking about how the building had been plagued with mysterious suicides. Just a few more deaths and the whole place will be abandoned. No one dares to live there anymore. After finishing his meal, Juan left the restaurant and headed home. His house was not far from the haunted building the women were talking about, less than 100 meters away. As he walked, a thought crossed his mind. "Maybe I should sell my house," he pondered. "Deposit the money in the bank and live off the interest. Many people do that and live comfortably. Why am I holding on to this old place back at home?" Juan picked up his phone and dialed a friend named Jam, a successful real estate agent. "Hey Young, you busy? I need some advice," Juan said. "Thinking about selling my house seriously," Young replied, surprised. "Why now?" "But sure, I can help. I'll come over this afternoon. We can discuss it." After the call, Juan felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He put up a close sign on his shop and began tidying the house in anticipation of Jam's visit. "If I can sell this place for around 4 billion VND, I'd be set," he thought. "This area is developing fast. It could be worth even more by afternoon." Jang arrived. They sat down to discuss the potential sale. "Your house should fetch over 5 billion, easily," Jang estimated. "If you're planning to move, where will you go?" "I'm thinking of renting a room in that mini apartment building nearby," Juan replied. "It's cheap, just over 4 million a month," Young raised an eyebrow. "You mean the haunted one? The place where people keep jumping off the rooftop?" he asked, incredulous. "Are you serious?" "It's the talk of the town. Everyone says it's cursed." Juan chuckled. "I don't believe in ghosts. All these stories are just superstitions. Besides, the rent is dropping. I could save a lot of money," Gyam shrugged, clearly skeptical but didn't push further. "Well, it's your choice," he said. "But remember, you can't change fate. If something happens, don't blame me." After they discussed the sale, Juan was determined to go through with his plan. A few days later, the house was officially listed. It didn't take long for potential buyers to show interest. On the day of the viewing, a middle-aged man and his agent came to see the house. After a brief tour, the man seemed interested but wanted a discount. "This is already the lowest price," Yam interjected, sensing Juan's hesitation. "Any lower and it's not worth selling." The man agreed and they arranged to finalize the deal. As they left, Yang pulled Juan aside. "You know, I think you should reconsider moving into that apartment," he warned. "There's something off about that place." Juan shook his head. "I'm not worried. It's just a place like any other." A week after selling his house, Juan moved into the mini apartment building. On the day of the move, Jiang and a few friends helped him with his belongings. Once settled, he called Mrs. Ho's restaurant to order lunch, asking for Khan, the delivery girl, to bring it to his new place. Half an hour later, Khan arrived. She looked different today, more beautiful than usual, with a touch of makeup that accentuated her features. Juan couldn't help but notice. "Why are you staring at me like that?" Khan asked, smiling shyly. "Nothing. You just look really pretty today," he replied awkwardly, blushing. They chatted briefly, and Juan invited her in for a quick meal. Reluctantly, she agreed, but insisted she wouldn't stay long. "Just a quick bite," she said. I have to get back to work the 8 and talked, the atmosphere light and pleasant. But as Khan was about to leave, Horn felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at the corridor and thought he saw a shadow move past. He brushed it off, convincing himself it was nothing. Probably just my imagination, he thought. That night, as Hoan lay in bed, he was jolted awake by the sound of soft crying. It was coming from the room next door. Who could be crying at this hour, he wondered. He hesitated, but then decided to check it out. He opened his door and walked over to the next room, knocking softly. "Is everything all right?" he called out. The door creaked open, revealing a pale young woman with long black hair. Her face was blank, her eyes hollow. "Can I help you?" Hoan asked cautiously. The woman simply stared, her expression emotionless. Suddenly she stepped aside, revealing the dim-lit interior of her room. "Come in," she whispered. Without thinking, Hoan followed. As he stepped inside, he noticed the room was freezing, much colder than his own. "Why is it so cold in here?" he wondered aloud. The woman said nothing, just pointed to a corner where a large wardrobe had toppled over. "Can you help me lift this?" she asked. Hoan nodded, still uneasy. He bent down and heaved the wardrobe back into place. "There you go," he said, forcing a smile. "Anything else I can do?" She shook her head. "No, thank you," she whispered. As he turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice soft but chilling. "Do you believe in ghosts, Hoan?" Hoan froze at the question, a shiver running down his spine. "No, I don't," he replied, trying to sound confident. "I've never seen one, and I don't think they exist." The woman gave a faint smile, but her eyes remained hollow. "You will," she whispered as she closed the door. Back in his room, Hoan tried to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over him. Just a strange woman, he thought. Probably just lonely, but as he lay in bed, trying to sleep, he couldn't stop thinking about her cold, hollow eyes. The next day, he decided to ask the building manager about the woman. "Oh, that room," the manager replied, looking uneasy. "No one's lived there for months. It's been empty since the last tenant." "Well, since she jumped off the rooftop," Hoan's blood ran cold. "But I saw her last night," he protested. "I talked to her." The manager shook his head. "You must be mistaken," he said. "Or maybe you've seen the ghost they say haunts this place." That night, the crying started again. This time, Hoan was too scared to check. He lay in bed, eyes wide open, clutching his blanket tightly. Maybe Jan was right, he thought. Maybe this place really is cursed. The ghost on the rooftop was more than just a story, it was real, and it was far from done with him. The next few days were quiet, but Hoan couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered. Every night he would hear the soft crying coming from the same room, and every night he would stay in bed, too afraid to investigate. He kept to himself, rarely interacting with the other tenants, who seemed just as wary of him as they were of the building. Then one evening, as he was preparing dinner, there was a knock at his door. It was the young man from the end of the hallway, the one who had also recently moved in. "Hey," the man said with a smile. "I'm Ling. I noticed we're neighbors. Thought I'd say hello." Hoan invited him in, grateful for the company. They sat and chatted, sharing stories over a couple of beers. Ling seemed friendly enough, but there was something about him that put Hoan on edge. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing towards the door, as if expecting someone to walk in, or perhaps it was the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. As the evening went on, the conversation turned to the building and its dark history. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Ling asked suddenly, his tone serious. Hoan hesitated, recalling the strange encounters he had experienced. "I didn't," he admitted. "But this place, it makes you question things." Ling nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, there are things in this world we can't explain," he said. "Things that stay with you, no matter how much you try to forget." Over the next few weeks, Hoan and Ling grew closer, bonding over their shared experiences in the airy building. But despite the friendship, Hoan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He often caught Ling staring at him, a strange look in his eyes, like he knew something Hoan didn't. One night, unable to sleep, Hoan decided to confront the ghost. He walked to the next door room and knocked. The door creaked open, and the same pale woman stood there, her expression unchanged. "Why do you cry every night?" Hoan asked, his voice steady but his hands trembling. The woman just stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. "I can't rest," she whispered. "I'm trapped here." "Because of him." Because of who? Hoan pressed, but the woman only turned away, moving further into the room. He followed her inside, noticing how the air grew colder with each step. She stopped by the window, pointing to the rooftop. "He made me jump," she said softly. "I didn't want to die." Horn's heart pounded in his chest. "Who?" he demanded again. "Tell me who did this to you." She turned to face him, her eyes now filled with tears. "Ling," she whispered. It was Ling. Horn's breath caught in his throat. He backed away slowly, his mind racing. Ling? His friend? The friendly neighbor who had seemed so eager to get to know him? He couldn't believe it. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "That can't be true." But as he thought back to all their conversations, he realized there were things that didn't add up. The way Ling always seemed to know so much about the building's history, the way he spoke about ghosts with a strange, almost personal familiarity. It all started to make a sick kind of sense. Determined to find out the truth, Hoan decided to confront Lin. He stormed down the hallway and banged on Lin's door. When Lin opened it, his face was calm, but there was a hint of something dark in his eyes. "What's going on?" Hoan, he asked, feigning innocence. "You know exactly what's going on," Hoan snapped. "I know what you did. I know you're the reason." She jumped for a moment. Lin's calm demeanor faltered. His eyes flickered with something, fear perhaps, or maybe guilt. But then, just as quickly, he composed himself. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice cold. "Maybe you're the one who's losing your mind living in this place." Before Hoan could respond, Ling suddenly lunged at him, pushing him back into the hallway. They struggled, Ling's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand," he hissed. "She wouldn't leave me alone. She kept coming back, haunting me, driving me mad." Realization hit Hoan like a punch to the gut. "You killed her," he breathed. "You pushed her off the roof." Lin froze, his grip loosening for a moment. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered, almost to himself. "I just wanted her to stop seizing the opportunity." Horn broke free and sprinted down the hallway, heading for the stairwell. He could hear Lin's footsteps pounding behind him, could feel his hot breath on the back of his neck. He raced up to the rooftop, the only place he could think to go. When he burst through the rooftop door, the cold night air hit him like a slap. He turned to face Lin, who was now standing in the doorway, panting heavily, eyes wild. "You're just like her," Lin snarled. "You won't leave me alone." Hoan braced himself, his back to the edge of the rooftop. "You don't have to do this," he pleaded. "You can stop this. Let her go. Let yourself go." But Ling only laughed, a high, maniacal sound that echoed through the night. "It's too late for that," he said, stepping closer. "Too late for both of us." Just as Lin was about to charge, a figure emerged from the shadows behind him. It was the ghostly woman, her eyes now blazing with anger. "You," she whispered, her voice filled with fury. "You won't hurt anyone else." Lin turned, his face contorted with fear as he stumbled back. "No," he gasped. "No, stay away from me." The woman stepped forward, her presence growing stronger, more tangible. She reached out, her hands ghostly but firm, and pushed Lin back. Off balance, he teetered on the edge of the rooftop for a split second before tumbling over with a scream that was cut short by a sickening thud. Hoan watched in stunned silence as the woman turned to face him, her expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered. For believe me, before he could respond, she vanished, leaving only the cold night air and the distant sound of sirens approaching. The police arrived minutes later, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the commotion. Hoan gave his statement, explaining everything he knew about Lin and the ghost. Though skeptical, the officers couldn't deny the physical evidence of Lin's actions and the numerous accounts of strange happenings in the building. Days passed, and the story spread. The building's haunted reputation grew, and more tenants decided to move out, unwilling to live in a place where so much darkness had occurred. Hoan stayed, feeling a strange sense of duty to the spirits that remained. As he settled into a new routine, he began to feel a sense of peace. The crying stopped, and the cold chill that had plagued the building seemed to dissipate. It was as if the ghost had found some semblance of peace, and with it so had he. But every now and then, on quiet nights, when the wind was still and the moon hung low in the sky, he would hear a faint whisper in the dark, a soft voice saying, "Thank you," and he would smile, knowing that she was finally at rest. As time went by, the chilling events that transpired on the rooftop became a whispered legend among the residents. Despite the haunting stories and the uneasy glances of those around him, Hoan decided to stay in the building. He felt a strange attachment to the place, a connection he couldn't easily explain. It wasn't just about the ghostly encounters or the gruesome deaths, it was something deeper, a sense of unfinished business. One evening, while returning home from his new electronics repair shop, Owen found an envelope taped to his door. Inside was a letter from Mrs. Engate, the building's owner. It was an invitation to meet. Puzzled, Owen made his way to her office. Mrs. Engate greeted him with a warm but weary smile. "I heard what you did," she said, her voice low and sincere. "You uncovered the truth about Lynn. I just wanted to thank you personally." Owen nodded, unsure of what to say. "I just did what I thought was right," he replied. Mrs. Engate leaned forward, her expression suddenly serious. "This building, it has a dark past, one that's hard to shake off. But I believe it can be a place of new beginnings. With your help, I think we can make that happen in Treat." Owen asked what she had in mind. She explained her plans to renovate the building, to bring in new tenants and create a community that could thrive without the shadow of fear hanging over them. "But I need someone like you," she continued, "someone who isn't afraid of the past, someone who can help others feel safe here." Moved by her words and the shared desire to cleanse the building of its haunting memories, Owen agreed to help. Together, they began working on the renovations, fixing up the old apartments, repainting the walls, and installing new lighting to brighten the dark corridors. Word spread quickly about the changes, and soon new tenants started moving in, drawn by the affordable rent and the promise of a fresh start. During his time, Owen noticed a change in himself as well. The nightmares that had plagued him for weeks started to fade. He no longer felt the icy chill that once filled the building, and the oppressive weight of dread that hung in the air seemed to lift. The presence of the ghostly woman was no longer a source of fear, but rather a reminder of his resolve to change things for the better. One day, while working on the rooftop garden, a new addition to the building, Owen heard a familiar voice. "You've done well," it whispered. Startled, he turned around, half expecting to see the ghostly figure, but there was no one. Instead, a gentle breeze brushed past him, and he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. It was as if she was there, watching, approving of the changes he was making. Months passed and the building began to thrive. The once abandoned hallways were now filled with the sounds of laughter and conversations. Families moved in, children played in the renovated courtyard, and a sense of community began to take root. Owen found himself more content than he had been in years. His repair shop was doing well, and he had made new friends among the tenants. Yet, even as life returned to the building, he couldn't forget the past. Every so often, when the night was quiet and the building was still, he would find himself drawn to the rooftop. He would stand by the edge where Lynn had fallen, looking out over the city, reflecting on everything that happened. It was on one of these nights that he noticed something unusual, a faint, glowing figure at the far end of the rooftop. It was the ghostly woman. Her figure was translucent, bathed in a soft, ethereal light. She stood there, looking out over the city, her expression peaceful. As Owen approached, she turned to face him, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a gentle breeze, "for giving me peace." Owen smiled, a sense of closure settling over him. "You're free now," he said softly. "You can move on." The ghostly figure nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek. And with that, she slowly faded away, her form dissolving into the night, leaving Owen alone on the rooftop. Life in the building continued to improve. The renovations were nearly complete, and a sense of normalcy had returned. Owen's nights were no longer filled with nightmares or ghostly encounters. Instead, they were filled with dreams of the future, of what this place could become. The tenants, too, seemed to have moved past the dark events that once haunted their lives. They were no longer afraid of the shadows, no longer whispering about ghosts. But one evening, as Owen was preparing to close his shop, he received a call from Mrs. Engate. Her voice was trembling with fear. "Owen," she said urgently, "there's something you need to see." He rushed back to the building and found her waiting in the lobby. She led him to one of the newly renovated apartments. "This was supposed to be empty," she whispered, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was cold, unnaturally so. And in the center of the room, written on the freshly painted walls, were the words, "He's not gone." Home's blood ran cold. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Engate shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know," she replied. "But I think there's still something left here. Something we haven't finished." Determined to uncover the truth, Owen spent the next few days investigating, talking to the remaining old tenants and digging through records. What he found was disturbing. The building's history was even darker than he had imagined. Before Ling and the ghostly woman, There had been other deaths, other mysterious disappearances. It was as if the building itself was cursed, a place where tragedy seemed to strike again and again. He realized that the work was far from over. There were still secrets hidden within these walls, secrets that needed to be uncovered and laid to rest. He and Mrs. Nguyet decided to delve deeper into the building's past, hoping to find a way to finally break the cycle of tragedy that seemed to haunt it. One night, as they were combing through old blueprints in the basement, they found something strange, a hidden room, one that didn't appear on any of the current plans. What is this? Mrs. Nguyet wondered aloud, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. It's not on any of the newer maps, Hoan replied, his mind racing. But it's here. We need to find it. They searched for hours, following the old plans through the maze-like corridors and abandoned storage rooms, until they finally found it, a door hidden behind a false wall. With a heavy breath, Hoan pushed the door open, revealing a small, dark room. Inside were old, dusty furniture and strange symbols painted on the walls. In the center of the room was a large mirror, cracked and covered in dust. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The air grew heavy, and the faint scent of decay filled their nostrils. Hoan felt a chill run down his spine. What is this place? He muttered, stepping closer to the mirror. As he wiped away the dust, his reflection stared back at him, but there was something wrong. His reflection's eyes were wide with fear, and behind him he could see faint, ghostly figures moving in the shadows. He turned quickly, but the room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the figures were gone. This place is a portal, Mrs. Nguyet whispered, her voice trembling, a doorway to something dark. Hoan nodded, his mind reeling. We need to close it, he said firmly. We need to seal this place for good. They worked quickly, using everything they could find to block the door, to seal the room away. As they did, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to grow darker. They could hear whispers, soft, chilling voices growing louder and more insistent. But they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door was sealed, and the room was closed off. The whispers ceased, and the air grew warmer. The tension that had gripped the building seemed to lift, replaced by a calm, almost serene silence. Exhausted, Hoan and Mrs. Nguyet sat down, their hearts pounding. Do you think it's over? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hope so, Hoan replied, though he wasn't sure. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many things they didn't understand. But he felt a strange sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, the building seemed different, brighter, more alive. The renovations continued, and life returned to normal. The tenants, unaware of the night's events, went about their day, oblivious to the darkness that had been sealed away just beneath their feet. Hoan knew that the building's past would never truly be forgotten. It would always be a part of it, a shadow that lingered in the background, but for now at least it was over. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could finally move on. Months later, on a clear spring day, Hoan stood on the rooftop once more, looking out over the city. The building was thriving, filled with new life and new energy. The renovations were complete, and the community was stronger than ever. He felt a sense of pride in what they had accomplished, a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. As he turned to leave, he saw something out of the corner of his eye, a faint, ghostly figure standing at the edge of the rooftop. It was the woman, the same woman who had haunted his nights for so long, but this time her expression was different. She was smiling, a look of contentment on her face. Thank you, she whispered, her voice carried by the wind. For giving us peace, Hoan smiled back, a tear rolling down his cheek. You're welcome, he replied softly. Rest now. And with that she faded away, leaving only the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze as Hoan turned and walked back inside, finally to start a new chapter of his life. In the months that followed, the building continued to flourish, becoming a beacon of hope and renewal in the city. Hoan's repair shop expanded, and he became a trusted figure in the community, known not just for his skills but for his kindness and courage. The ghost stories became a distant memory, replaced by tales of new beginnings and second chances. And though the shadows of the past remained, they were no longer a source of fear but a reminder of how far they had come. The building, once a place of death and despair, was now a place of life and hope, a testament to the power of change and the strength of the human spirit. Horn knew that there would always be more to do, more challenges to face, but he was ready. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And as he looked out over the bustling streets below, he smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. As the years went by, the building at the end of the alley, once notorious for its ghostly tales and eerie happenings, transformed into a vibrant community. The story of the haunting and Horn's brave actions became local legend, often told by the older residents to the new arrivals. The rooftop, where so much had occurred, became a place of reflection and remembrance, with a small garden in one corner where flowers bloomed year-round, a tribute to the lives lost and the spirit that had finally found peace. Horn's life, too, continued to change. His repair shop became one of the most popular in the district, known for its reliable service and fair prices. But more than that, he became a confidant, a mentor to many of the younger residents. They often sought his advice not just about fixing things but about life itself. He had become a pillar of the community, someone who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. One day, as he was fixing a broken refrigerator, a young woman entered the shop. She was new to the building, having moved in just a few weeks prior. She looked nervous, almost hesitant, as she approached him. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Ho?" And he looked up, smiling kindly. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" She glanced around, as if afraid of being overheard. "I heard stories," she began, "about the building." "About you?" Hoan nodded, putting down his tools. "Yes, there are many stories, some true, some not so true." She took a deep breath. "I think I've seen something. In my room. A shadow. I'm not sure if it's real or if it's just my imagination." Horn listened carefully, his expression calm and understanding. "This building has a history," he said gently. "Sometimes the past leaves its mark even on the walls. But it doesn't mean it's still here or that it wants to harm you." The young woman nodded, but her face remained troubled. I don't know what to do. Should I move out?" He shook his head. "No need to rush. Sometimes facing our fears is the best way to overcome them. If you like, I can come by and take a look. Make sure everything's alright." She smiled, a bit relieved. "I'd appreciate that. Thank you." That evening, Hoan visited her apartment. He felt a familiar chill as he stepped inside, a reminder of his own first days in the building. He checked the room carefully, looking for any signs of what might have caused her unease. As he reached the window, he noticed a faint reflection in the glass, a fleeting shadow that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. He turned back to her, keeping his tone light. "Nothing here that a bit of fresh air and some light can't fix," he said, opening the window. "Keep this open during the day. Let the light in. It helps." The woman thanked him again, visibly more at ease. As Hoan left, he felt a strange sense of deja vu, a reminder of his early days battling the darkness that once filled the building. But now, things were different. The shadows no longer held the same power over him. He knew that as long as he was here, the building would remain a place of light. Despite the occasional sighting or whispered rumor, the haunting had all but faded into the past. The rooftop garden flourished, a symbol of the community's resilience. Families gathered there on weekends, sharing meals and stories under the open sky. It became a place where life could be celebrated, where the past was remembered but not feared. One night, as Horn was closing up his shop, he saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the garden. It was the ghostly woman, her form shimmering in the moonlight. But this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a young man, his face pale but kind, and a little girl with bright, curious eyes. Horn felt a lump in his throat as he approached. The woman turned to him, her eyes soft with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carried on the wind, "for everything." Horn nodded, unable to speak. The little girl smiled at him, her face filled with innocence and joy. "Are you the one who helped us?" she asked, her voice clear and sweet. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I am." The woman reached out, taking his hand in hers. It was cold, but there was a warmth to her touch, a comfort. "You've given us peace," she said, "and for that we will always be grateful." As she spoke, their figures began to fade, dissolving into the night air. Hoan watched them go, tears streaming down his face. But he wasn't sad. He knew that they were finally free, finally at rest. The following morning, as the first rays of sunlight bathed the rooftop in a golden glow, Hoan stood alone, looking out over the city. The air was crisp and fresh, the scent of blooming flowers carried on the breeze. He felt a sense of calm, a deep satisfaction that came from knowing he had done something good, something right. He knew there would always be shadows, always be memories of the past. But they were just that, memories. They no longer had the power to haunt him or anyone else. The building, once a place of fear and death, was now a place of life and hope. As he made his way back down to his shop, he passed by the new tenants' families, young couples, elderly friends who greeted him with smiles and warm hellos. He felt a deep connection to them all, a shared understanding that they were building something new, something better. And as he opened his shop for another day of work, he knew that this was where he belonged. In this building, with these people facing whatever came next together. The past was behind them, and the future was wide open. And for Hoan, that was more than enough. As the seasons changed, so did the atmosphere within the building. The chilling stories of hauntings and whispers of ghosts had become a thing of the past. The once cursed building had been given a new lease on life, filled with warmth, laughter, and the vibrant energy of its residents. The rooftop, once a place of fear, now served as a communal garden where the tenants would gather, sharing stories, tending to the flowers, and watching the city skyline glow at dusk. Hoan, having embraced his role as the unofficial guardian of the building, found himself more fulfilled than ever. His days were busy with repairs, helping neighbors, and overseeing the community's well-being. The shop thrived, and he often found himself swamped with orders and requests, but he welcomed the bustle. He had discovered a purpose, a reason to stay, and that made all the difference. One evening, as he locked up the shop, he noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench near the garden. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Hoan approached, recognizing him as Mr. Tuan, one of the newer residents who had moved in with his granddaughter. "Evening, Mr. Tuan," he greeted warmly. "Mind if I join you?" the old man nodded, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Please," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "I was just remembering. It's peaceful here, isn't it?" Hoan nodded, sitting down beside him. "It is." "A lot has changed, for the better." Mr. Tuan sighed deeply, looking down at his hands. "You know, I've lived in many places, but none have felt quite like this. There's a sense of redemption here, as if the building itself is healing." Hoan smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. "I think you're right," he said. "Sometimes places hold on to the past, but they can also change just like people." The two men sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the last light of the day faded and the city lights began to twinkle. It was moments like these that made everything worthwhile for Hoan. The sense of community, the feeling of belonging, it was something he had never truly experienced before. Breaking the silence, Mr. Tuan spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I've heard the stories, about the past, about the ghosts. Do you think they've truly moved on?" Hoan thought for a moment, then nodded. "I think so," he replied. "I think they found peace, just as we all are finding ours." Mr. Tuan nodded, a look of relief on his face. "That's good to hear," he said quietly. "My granddaughter, she was afraid when we first moved in, but now she's made friends, she's smiling again. It's like this place has given her a second chance." Hoan smiled. "That's what it's all about," he said. Second chances. For all of us. As they sat there, the sounds of laughter and music drifted up from the apartments below. The community had grown close, and tonight was no different. There was always some kind of gathering, some reason to celebrate. And for the first time in a long time, Hoan felt truly content. Later that night, Hoan returned to his apartment, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. As he prepared for bed, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror. He looked different now, older, perhaps, but also wiser. The lines on his face told a story of resilience, of perseverance, of overcoming darkness with light. Climbing into bed, he let out a sigh of contentment. His thoughts drifted back to the ghostly woman, to Lynn, to all those who had been a part of this journey. He wondered where they were now, if they were truly at peace. He believed they were, he had to believe it. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt a familiar presence. The air around him grew cool, but not unpleasant. It was almost comforting, like an old friend. In his dreams, he saw her again, the ghostly woman, standing at the edge of the rooftop, smiling softly. She nodded to him, a gesture of gratitude and farewell. Hoan smiled in his sleep, knowing that this was their final goodbye. She had found her peace, and so had he. The next morning, Hoan awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. He went about his day, attending to repairs and checking in on the tenants. Everywhere he went, he was greeted with smiles, with gratitude. The building was no longer just a structure of brick and mortar, it was a living, breathing entity, a community that thrived on the strength of its people. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the future. There was still so much he wanted to do, so many plans he had for the building and its residents. Perhaps a new playground for the children, or a communal kitchen where everyone could share meals and stories. The possibilities were endless. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Juan gathered the residents on the rooftop garden. They lit candles in remembrance of those who had passed, a small ceremony they had begun holding each month. It was a way to honor the past, to acknowledge the pain and loss, but also to celebrate the lives they were living now. As the candles flickered in the night, casting soft shadows on the walls, Juan spoke. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice strong and clear. "This building has seen its share of darkness, but it's also seen light. We are that light, each of us, together, and I believe we will continue to shine. No matter what comes our way," the residents cheered, raising their candles high. It was a moment of unity, of solidarity, and as they stood there under the vast night sky, Juan felt a surge of pride. They had done this together. They had turned a place of fear into a place of hope. As the gathering broke up and people began to head back to their apartments, Juan remained on the rooftop, gazing out over the city. The lights below twinkled like stars, and for a moment he felt a sense of connection to something greater than himself, a feeling that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the cool night air against his skin. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, still be shadows to face, but he also knew that they would face them together as a community. And with that thought, he turned and made his way back downstairs, ready to embrace whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Juan wasn't afraid. He was ready. Ready to keep building, keep going, keep living, for he knew that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all. Weeks turned into months, and the building continued to flourish under Juan's watchful eye. The community grew closer, bonds strengthening with each passing day. The rooftop garden became a cherished spot for gatherings, celebrations, and quiet moments of reflection. It was there, amidst the blooming flowers and the gentle rustle of leaves, that Juan found his greatest solace. One evening, as he watered the plants, he noticed a young couple sitting on a bench, holding hands and whispering softly to each other. They were new tenants, having moved in just a few weeks prior. Their eyes sparkled with joy, their faces full of hope for the future. Juan watched them for a moment, a warm smile spreading across his face. This was what it was all about, creating a space where people could feel safe, where they could build a life filled with love and happiness. As the couple left, they passed by Juan and thanked him for making them feel welcome. "This place feels like home," the young woman said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything you've done." Juan nodded, touched by their words. "It's my pleasure," he replied. "We're all in this together." As the days grew warmer, the building prepared for its annual summer festival, a tradition that had quickly become a favorite among the residents. It was a time for everyone to come together, to share food, music, and stories under the stars. This year, Juan had a special surprise plan. With the help of some of the younger tenants, he had strung up fairy lights across the rooftop, creating a canopy of twinkling stars above their heads. The night of the festival arrived, and the rooftop was abuzz with excitement. Tables were laden with homemade dishes, and a small band played lively tunes in the corner. Children ran around, laughing and playing, while the adults mingled, sharing stories and laughter. Juan stood back, taking it all in. He felt a deep sense of pride as he watched the scene unfold before him. This was more than just a building now, it was a community, a family. And he was a part of it, woven into the fabric of their lives. As the night wore on, he found himself drawn to the edge of the rooftop, where he had once faced Ling in a deadly confrontation. The memories were still vivid, but they no longer held the same weight. He felt lighter now, free from the darkness that had once consumed him. Lost in thought, he didn't notice Mrs. Henriette approaching until she was standing beside him. "You've done a wonderful job, Juan," she said softly, her voice filled with admiration. "I don't think any of this would have been possible without you." He turned to her, smiling modestly. "It's not just me," he replied. Everyone here has played a part. We've all built this place together, she nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. Still, you've been the heart of it all. Thank you for believing in this place, in all of us. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the festivities. The music played on, and the laughter echoed across the rooftop. It was a perfect night, filled with warmth and light. As the festival drew to a close, Hohen gathered everyone around for a toast. Raising his glass, he spoke from the heart. To our community, he said, his voice steady and clear. To the life we've built together, and to the future we will continue to create. May this place always be a home for all who enter. The residents cheered, clinking their glasses together, their faces glowing with happiness. It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration of everything they had achieved. As they drank and laughed, Hoan felt a sense of peace settle over him. He knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but he also knew that they could face them together. That night, as he lay in bed, he felt a familiar presence, a gentle, calming sensation that filled the room. He opened his eyes to see the ghostly woman standing by his bedside, her expression serene and content. "Thank you," she whispered once more, her voice barely audible. "For giving us a new beginning," Hoan smiled, feeling a tear slip down his cheek. "You're welcome," he whispered back. "Rest now." And with that she faded away, leaving behind a sense of calm and a lingering warmth that stayed with him as he drifted off to sleep. In the weeks that followed, the building continued to thrive. The summer festival was a huge success, and the residents spoke of it for days afterward. Already planning for next year's event, the sense of camaraderie and togetherness that had been fostered over the past few years had only grown stronger, and the building was now a place where people wanted to be, a place where they felt safe, supported, and loved. One day, as Hoan was working in his shop, he received a visit from a journalist who had heard about the building's transformation. She was interested in writing a story about the community, about how it had turned from a place of fear into a beacon of hope. Hoan agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to share their journey and inspire others. The article was published a few weeks later, and it received a lot of attention. People from all over the city came to visit, curious to see the building that had once been infamous for its hauntings. Some even asked if there were any apartments available, eager to become a part of the thriving community. As the building's reputation grew, so did its sense of purpose. It became a place not just for living, but for healing, for finding second chances, and for building a better future. Years passed, and the building continued to stand strong, a testament to the power of community and the resilience of the human spirit. The ghost stories had faded into memory, replaced by tales of hope and renewal. Hoan had become a beloved figure, not just in the building but in the wider community. His repair shop was now a bustling business, and he was often sought after for his wisdom and guidance. One evening, as he prepared to close the shop, a young man entered, looking nervous and unsure. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Hoan?" Hoan looked up, smiling kindly. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The young man hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I'm looking for a place to stay," he said. "I heard this building is different, special. I don't have much, but I'm willing to work to help out." Hoan nodded, understanding the young man's situation. "We have room," he said, "and we're always looking for good people." Welcome. The young man's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you so much." As Hoan showed him around the building, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was what it was all about, giving people a chance, a place to belong. He knew that the young man would find a home here, just as so many others had before him. That night, as he stood on the rooftop looking out over the city, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. The building had become a symbol of hope, a place where the past was acknowledged but not allowed to define them. A place where everyone, no matter their story, could find peace. And as the stars twinkled above, Hoan knew that he had found his place in the world, a place where he could make a difference, where he could help others find their own path to healing and happiness. With a contented sigh, he turned and made his way back downstairs, ready to face whatever the future held, for he knew that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't overcome, and that, he realized, was the true meaning of home. The building stood tall and proud, a beacon of hope and renewal in a city constantly changing. It had seen darkness, and it had seen light. It had been a place of fear, and now it was a place of love and community. And at the heart of it all was Hoan, a man who had faced the ghosts of the past and turned them into something beautiful. He had found his purpose here, his reason to stay. And as he watched the new day dawn, he knew that this was only the beginning. There were still stories to be told, still lives to be touched, and still so much more to be done. But whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it with courage, with hope, and with the unshakable belief that together they could build something truly extraordinary. And that was all he needed. With a smile, he closed his eyes and let the warmth of the morning sun wash over him, feeling a sense of peace and contentment he had never known before. This was his home, and he would protect it, nurture it, and help it grow. For as long as he lived, he would be a part of this community, a part of this family. And that was more than enough. The end.